They seemed, to all outward appearances, to be just like any other couple on Maple Street. David and Jennifer. They'd been married for, well, over a decade now, maybe 12, 13 years. Something like that. Long enough to settle into a comfortable routine. Long enough that their house, a tidy split level with blue shutters, blended perfectly into the quiet suburban landscape. You know the kind of neighborhood. Lawns neatly trimmed, mailboxes standing at attention, kids occasionally riding bikes down the sidewalk. A place where the most exciting event was usually the annual block party or maybe someone getting a new roof. David was a quiet man, worked in accounting. Solid, reliable. Drove a sensible sedan. Always waved if you were out gardening. Jennifer was maybe a little more outgoing, involved in a local book club, sometimes volunteered at the animal shelter. She had a bright, quick smile. They seemed, well, content. Not the couple putting on big, flashy displays, but the kind who shared a quiet dinner on the patio, who walked their golden retriever, Max, in the evenings, who just fit together in that ordinary, settled way. They recently renovated their kitchen, put in granite countertops. Planning for the future, everyone assumed. Building a life, brick by brick, day by ordinary day. There wasn't, not that anyone could see, any sign of cracks beneath the surface. No loud arguments spilling into the street, no police cars ever parked outside their address, no whispers circulating through the neighborhood grapevine about trouble in paradise. If you had to pick a couple who had it all together, the kind you'd feel comfortable leaving your spare key with, it might have been David and Jennifer. Their life was a calm, predictable current flowing smoothly down the river. But sometimes the calmest surface hides the deepest, darkest currents. Sometimes the predictable flow hits a sudden, unseen drop. David came home that Thursday evening just like any other. The automatic garage door whirred open. He pulled his sedan inside, the familiar scent of motor oil and stored paint hitting his nose. He walked through the side door into the kitchen, expecting the usual greeting, the sound of dinner being prepared, maybe Max wagging his tail. The house was silent. Not just quiet, but silent. A heavy, unnatural silence that immediately felt wrong. He called out Jennifer's name. No answer. Called again, louder. Still nothing. Max wasn't at the door. His food bowl was full. David walked through the house. Living room, empty. Dining room, undisturbed. Upstairs. Their bedroom. The bed was made. The bathroom, tidy. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse was on the hall table where she always left it. Her keys were beside it. Everything seemed normal. Except for the complete and total absence of Jennifer. It wasn't like her to just leave. Without a note, without a call, without taking her car keys or purse. David checked his phone. No missed calls, no texts from her. He tried calling her. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. A knot of unease began to tighten in his stomach. He walked back downstairs, back into the silent kitchen. He stood there for a moment, looking around, searching for something, anything, that could explain this. The house felt cold now, despite the warm evening air outside. Jennifer was gone. Vanished. Without a trace. And in that sudden, inexplicable emptiness, the first faint, chilling ripple disturbed the perfect surface of Maple Street. A ripple that no one, not David, not their neighbors, could have ever predicted would turn into a devastating wave. That knot of unease in David's stomach, it didn't loosen. It tightened, growing colder with every passing minute Jennifer didn't appear, didn't call, didn't respond to his increasingly frantic texts that he sent into the digital void. Hours trickled by. He paced the silent house, checking every room again, pulling open closets, looking under beds, as if she might be playing a bizarre, out-of-character game of hide-and-seek. Max, the golden retriever, sensed the tension. He followed David, his tail low, occasionally whining softly, looking up at his owner with questioning eyes. Even the dog seemed to know something was profoundly wrong. But instead of immediately dialing 911, instead of alerting the authorities the moment the knot became unbearable, David waited. He called a couple of Jennifer's friends first, asking if they'd heard from her, if she'd mentioned going anywhere. Their confusion mirrored his, perhaps mixed with a hint of concern. He even called her workplace the next morning. She hadn't shown up. Still, he waited. He waited a full 24 hours before he finally picked up the phone and reported his wife, Jennifer Miller, missing. That delay would be the first thing that struck the investigators as odd. People in distress, real, genuine distress, usually don't wait a full day. They call immediately. They're desperate for help. David's explanation. He thought she might have just needed some space, gone to a hotel after a minor disagreement they'd had the previous day. A minor disagreement? About what, they'd ask later. He'd be vague. That vagueness, that delay, it opened the door to the first sliver of doubt. When the uniformed officers arrived, followed shortly by detectives, the house on Maple Street presented a confusing picture. It was immaculate. Spotlessly clean. Almost, too clean. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, nothing to suggest an intruder had been there. But as the detectives, led by a seasoned veteran named Detective Harding, walked through the rooms, they noticed something else. A strong, almost overwhelming smell of disinfectant. It hung heavy in the air, particularly in the bathroom off the master bedroom, and noticeably, in the garage. It was the kind of smell you get after a deep, purposeful scrub down, not just a routine clean. David explained he'd been doing some spring cleaning, trying to keep busy while he waited for Jennifer to show up. Spring cleaning in the garage in the middle of the night? The explanation felt thin. Detective Harding had seen a lot in his 20 years. He knew that crime scenes, even missing person scenes that turn out to be homicides, are rarely pristine. There's usually something out of place, a forgotten detail, a sign of struggle or hasty departure. The sterile cleanliness of the Miller house felt wrong. It felt done. They began the interviews. David sat at his dining room table, outwardly composed, though his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a glass of water. He recounted his day, Jennifer's last known movements. She'd been home when he left for work. He'd texted her during the day. Normal stuff. Plans for dinner. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He came home, she was gone. He waited. He called. He reported. Simple. Plausible on the surface. But the timeline felt stretched. His description of their minor disagreement lacked detail. And the cleaning? He insisted it was just something to occupy his mind. Harding watched his eyes. They were clear, not bloodshot from crying or lack of sleep, but they seemed guarded. Meanwhile, other officers began canvassing the neighborhood. Showing Jennifer's photo. Asking questions. Had anyone seen Jennifer after Thursday morning? Had anyone seen David? Heard anything unusual? Most neighbors offered variations of, they seemed like such a nice couple, and, we never saw anything out of the ordinary. Until Mrs. Rodriguez, 3 houses down, mentioned the argument. She was a light sleeper. Sometime late Thursday night, or maybe very early Friday morning, she wasn't sure, she thought she heard raised voices coming from the direction of the Miller house. It was muffled, indistinct, but definitely sounded like an argument. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, couples argue, right? But now, with Jennifer missing, she felt she had to mention it. She remembered hearing a woman's voice raised in distress, then, it was abruptly cut off. Followed by silence. An argument. Late at night. Right before Jennifer vanished. This didn't fit David's story of a minor disagreement earlier in the day. Investigators expanded their search. They looked in trash cans, dumpsters. And that's where they found Jennifer's cell phone. Tucked deep inside a public trash receptacle about a mile from the house. The phone wasn't smashed or water damaged. It had simply been discarded. Wiped clean. They'd check that later. But why would Jennifer, if she was just leaving, throw away her perfectly good phone? Especially so far from home. It made no sense. Unless someone else had done it. Someone who wanted to make it harder to trace her. The puzzle pieces were starting to appear, but they didn't fit the picture David was painting. The delayed report. The too clean house with the strong chemical smell. The neighbor's report of a late-night argument ending abruptly. The discarded phone. Taken individually, maybe explainable. Together, they painted a picture of something far more sinister than a wife simply walking away. The detectives decided to look for electronic footprints. They obtained warrants. Phone records, computer activity, security camera footage from businesses and homes in the area. This is where the first undeniable, chilling piece of the truth began to surface. Footage from a convenience store camera, located on the main road about 2 miles from the Miller house, captured vehicles driving by in the early hours of Friday morning. The timestamp was 3:17 a.m. And there it was. David Miller's sensible sedan. Driving away from his neighborhood. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clearly his car. The detectives watched the footage again. And again. Zooming in. They saw the lone figure of David in the driver's seat. And in the back seat, or maybe the trunk, it was hard to tell from this angle, there appeared to be a large, bulky object. Something wrapped or contained. It didn't look like luggage. It looked heavy. The car was gone for nearly 2 hours. The same camera captured it returning, heading back towards Maple Street, just before 5:30 a.m. Still just David in the driver's seat. The large object was no longer visible. David Miller, the quiet accountant, the stable husband, was driving around in the dead of night, just hours after his wife was last known to be alive, with a large, mysterious object in his car. An object that was gone when he returned. This was not the behavior of a worried husband whose wife had simply needed space. This was the behavior of someone trying to hide something. Or someone. The focus of the investigation shifted dramatically. They weren't just looking for Jennifer anymore. They were looking at David. And they began to dig deeper into the lives of David and Jennifer Miller, looking for secrets that might explain the late-night argument, the cleaning, the discarded phone, and that chilling drive. And that's when the first whispers of the other woman began to surface from the digital shadows, hinting at a betrayal that would soon explain everything, and nothing. The mundane peace of Maple Street evaporated. It was replaced by the quiet, purposeful activity of law enforcement. Based on the timeframe David's sedan was unaccounted for, combined with forensic intelligence gathered from the house, trace amounts of a specific soil type found on his garage floor, slightly disturbed earth near the back of the property, the focus narrowed dramatically. The area behind the garage, a small patch David had recently covered with a temporary layer of concrete, claiming he was planning a new patio feature, became a prime point of interest. Detective Harding ordered the area secured. Forensics teams moved in with specialized equipment. Ground-penetrating radar first, searching for anomalies beneath the surface. Then, cadaver dogs, their training honed to detect the scent of decomposition. The dogs quickly signaled in the designated area. The time for waiting was over. It was time to dig. The digging was slow, methodical. The concrete layer was thin, easily broken through. Beneath it was loose soil. The smell hit them first. The unmistakable, heavy, sickening odor that no amount of disinfectant could ever truly mask. It was the smell of death. As they dug deeper, carefully, layer by layer, the shovel struck something. Plastic sheeting. Wrapped tightly. Beneath the plastic, another layer. Fabric. They worked painstakingly to expose it, the tension in the air thick and suffocating. And then, they saw her. Wrapped tightly in what appeared to be a tarp and a discarded blanket, partially decomposed, was the body of a woman. Detective Harding knelt down, his face grim. There was no immediate need for identification through dental records or fingerprints, not yet. Even through the grim reality of decomposition, they could tell it was Jennifer Miller. And on her left hand, still clinging grimly to the bone, was her wedding ring. That small, golden circle, a symbol of love and commitment, found buried with her, less than 50 feet from her back door. She hadn't run away. She hadn't left. She had been right here, all along. The medical examiner's initial findings were blunt, confirming their worst fears. Jennifer Miller had died from asphyxiation, likely manual strangulation. There were also signs of blunt force trauma. The estimated time of death aligned chillingly with that late Thursday night, early Friday morning window, the same time the neighbor heard the argument, the same time David's car was captured on CCTV driving away with a mysterious, bulky object. David Miller was located and brought back to the station. He was no longer being questioned as a worried husband. He was a suspect in a homicide investigation. Confronted with the discovery of Jennifer's body on his property, confronted with the timeline, the cleaning, the CCTV footage, his carefully constructed facade began to crumble, slowly at first, then faster, like cracking ice under immense pressure. He denied it. Vehemently at first. She ran away. Someone else must have put her there. He had no idea. But the evidence was overwhelming. The soil on his garage floor matched the burial site. Trace fibers from the tarp and blanket matched items found in his garage. The sheer impossibility of someone else burying her there, precisely during the window his car was gone, was undeniable. Under intense questioning, David's story shifted. The minor disagreement. It wasn't minor. It escalated. But he still didn't admit to murder. He spoke of anger, of losing control, of things happening so fast he couldn't remember clearly. Pieces of a confession, wrapped in denial. But the physical evidence told a clearer, more brutal story. And the digital evidence began to fill in the gaping hole of motive. Investigators had been digging into Jennifer's online activity, phone records, looking for that hint of a secret life. And they found it. Messages. Emails. Social media interactions. A pattern of communication that wasn't with friends or family or colleagues. It was with another man. The messages were intimate. They spoke of meetings, plans, a relationship that had been going on for months, perhaps even a year. Jennifer Miller, the stable suburban wife, was having an affair. Investigators quickly identified the other man. He was someone David also knew, perhaps slightly. A colleague from a different department. Someone from her book club. The betrayal ran deeper than just a casual fling. They tracked him down. He was shocked, horrified by the news of Jennifer's death. He confirmed the affair. He described Jennifer as being increasingly stressed lately, worried about something he couldn't quite figure out. He hadn't heard from her since Thursday. The mistress. Her existence provided a powerful motive, jealousy, rage, the humiliation of betrayal. It explained the argument the neighbor heard. But was that all? A crime of passion, a sudden loss of control. Burying the body spoke of panic, yes, but also a chilling attempt at calculated concealment. And then, they found it. Tucked away in a small box in the back of the master bedroom closet, hidden beneath a stack of old towels. A home HIV test kit. Used. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigation team. It wasn't just an affair. There was a health secret involved. They sent the kit for forensic analysis, though the visual indicator on the test itself often tells the story. And they looked back at the messages between Jennifer and her mistress. They found conversations expressing worry, fear about a recent health scare, discussions about getting tested. The timeline of these messages lined up with a period of noticeable stress described by those who knew Jennifer. The truth, in its brutal entirety, began to assemble itself. David had discovered the affair. Perhaps he found the messages. Perhaps he confronted Jennifer. The timing is unclear, but the discovery of the hidden HIV test kit, that was the fuse. Whether Jennifer had just taken the test, whether the result was positive or negative, finding that test, linked to the Mistress, must have unleashed a perfect storm of rage, fear, and betrayal. The fear of a potential positive diagnosis, the fury at the double betrayal by his wife and the other man, it was too much. In that moment of explosive, uncontrollable rage, fueled by jealousy and terror, David attacked Jennifer. He silenced her, permanently, right there in their home, the place meant to be their sanctuary. But the title of this story is not just about the wife. It's about both. What about the Mistress? As investigators dug into the digital life of Jennifer and her affair, they also looked into the Mistress's life. And they discovered she, too, had been reported missing. Just days before Jennifer. Her friends hadn't heard from her. Her family was worried. Her apartment was empty, but not messy. Just, abandoned. Much like Jennifer's house initially seemed. As the evidence mounted against David for Jennifer's murder, the forensics, the timeline, the motive, they began to look for connections to the Mistress's disappearance. Phone records showed communication between David and the Mistress after Jennifer was last seen alive. Not just communication about Jennifer being missing, but direct calls and texts between them. Then, damningly, geolocation data and further CCTV footage placed David's sedan near the Mistress's apartment building late on Thursday night, before his car was seen on the highway with the bulky object. The horrifying reality crystallized. David hadn't just killed Jennifer in a fit of rage over the affair and the HIV test. The evidence suggested he had also confronted the Mistress. Perhaps he blamed her for the affair, for the potential health risk, for destroying his life. Perhaps he killed her first, in a cold fury, then returned home and the confrontation with Jennifer escalated when he was already a murderer. Or perhaps he killed Jennifer, then, in a desperate attempt to eliminate the only other person who knew the full scope of his secrets and fears, he went after the Mistress. Forensic searches, now expanded, eventually led to the discovery of the Mistress's body as well, in a different location than Jennifer's, perhaps more remote, requiring that late-night drive. Her cause of death also pointed to a violent end at David's hands. The man who appeared to be the picture of suburban normalcy, the quiet accountant, the stable husband, wasn't just a murderer. He was a double murderer. He killed his wife in a rage fueled by betrayal and the terror of a hidden health secret. And he killed his Mistress, the other woman who held the key to his unraveling life. All triggered by a small, plastic device found, hidden under a pillow. The secrets Jennifer and the Mistress held, the secret David feared, exploded into unspeakable violence. His attempts to clean, to hide, to create a false narrative, were ultimately futile. The smell of disinfectant, the disturbed earth, the silent drive in the night, the digital breadcrumbs, they all led back to him. And to the two women whose lives he brutally ended. With the overwhelming evidence in hand, 2 bodies recovered, forensic links to David Miller and his property, the chilling CCTV footage, the digital footprint of affairs and hidden fears, the quiet man from Maple Street was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The community that had known David and Jennifer, that had seen their seemingly ordinary life unfold, was left reeling. The news spread like wildfire, neighbor calling neighbor, disbelief mixing with a cold, sick dread. How could someone they saw walking his dog, waving hello, be capable of such monstrous acts? The facade had shattered completely, revealing a void of unimaginable darkness. David was processed, booked, and held without bail. The image of the quiet accountant was replaced by a mugshot, staring blankly, devoid of the warmth people thought they knew. The legal machine began to turn, a slow, deliberate process compared to the frantic pace of the investigation. There were preliminary hearings, grand jury proceedings, the formal indictment laying out the brutal charges. David entered a plea of not guilty, a standard legal maneuver, but one that felt like another layer of denial in the face of the grim reality the evidence painted. The prosecution began building their case, meticulously assembling the pieces of the puzzle investigators had uncovered. This wasn't just about that night, it was about weaving a narrative that explained the transformation from the man waving on his lawn to the man burying bodies in his backyard and a remote location. Their case would be built on a foundation of undeniable facts, each piece a nail in the coffin of David's claims of innocence. They had the forensic evidence, DNA found under Jennifer's fingernails that matched David, trace fibers from the tarps used to wrap both bodies matching materials in his garage. Soil samples from the burial sites that corresponded to the dirt found on his car's floor mats and in his garage. The disturbing evidence of the brutal force used, presented clinically by the medical examiner. They had the timeline, reconstructed with chilling precision, the neighbor's testimony of the argument, aligning with the estimated time of Jennifer's death. The critical CCTV footage showing David's car leaving the neighborhood, then returning, with clear indications he was transporting something large and heavy. Geolocation data from his phone confirming his movement near the mistress's apartment before that late-night drive, then near the mistress's disposal site. They had the digital breadcrumbs, messages between Jennifer and the mistress confirming the affair. Search histories potentially showing David researching disposal methods or looking up information about HIV. Phone records detailing the final, desperate communications between David and the mistress. And they had the motive, stark and explosive. The prosecution would argue it was a lethal cocktail of betrayal, humiliation, rage, and panic. David discovered his wife was having an affair with the mistress. But the true trigger, the event that sent him spiraling into a murderous frenzy, was the discovery of the hidden HIV test kit. The fear of a positive result, the terror of his life unraveling, of potential illness, combined with the fury of being betrayed by both women, it was an unbearable psychological pressure that erupted into horrific violence. They would show the jury the photo of the test kit, found hidden, a seemingly insignificant object that became the catalyst for double murder. The trial, when it finally began months later, was a somber affair. The courtroom was filled with a quiet, heavy tension. The families of Jennifer and the mistress sat together on one side, their faces etched with pain and loss. They had waited so long for this moment, not for vengeance, perhaps, but for justice, for acknowledgement of the lives that had been so cruelly taken. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Witness after witness. Investigator after investigator laying out the cold, hard facts. The forensics experts detailing the grim findings. The neighbors recounting the last times they saw Jennifer, the strange silence, the reported argument. The technology experts presenting the irrefutable data from phones and cameras. The medical examiner describing the injuries that ended 2 lives. David sat at the defense table, outwardly calm for the most part, taking notes, speaking quietly with his lawyers. But the mask occasionally slipped. A flicker in his eyes when particularly damning evidence was shown. A tightening of his jaw when the details of the affair were laid bare. He rarely looked towards the families of the victims. The defense attempted to poke holes, to create reasonable doubt. Perhaps Jennifer died during a volatile argument, a tragic accident born of passion, not premeditated murder. But how did that explain the extensive cleanup, the burial, the calculated disposal? How did that explain the murder of the mistress? They struggled to present a coherent alternative narrative that accounted for all the evidence, particularly the second victim and the chilling planning involved in concealing both crimes. The HIV test remained a powerful, devastating motive that the defense could not easily counter without admitting to the core triggers of David's rage. One of the most difficult moments came during the victim impact statements. Family members took the stand, their voices trembling but clear, speaking about the women David had taken from them. Jennifer's father, a man whose face showed years of quiet grief, spoke not just of his daughter, but of the son-in-law he had once trusted. "We welcomed him into our family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought he loved her. We never imagined this darkness." The sister of the mistress spoke of a vibrant life cut short, a future stolen, leaving behind an unbearable void. The raw, unembellished pain of their loss hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the clinical presentation of evidence. After days of testimony, the case went to the jury. Their deliberation wasn't lengthy. The evidence was simply too compelling, the motive too clear in its destructive power. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict. Guilty. Guilty on both counts of first-degree murder. A collective, quiet exhale from the victim's side. Stillness from David. The mask was back on. The sentencing followed. The judge spoke of the coldness of the crimes, the profound breach of trust, the utter disregard for human life. He spoke of the two women, loved and missed, whose lives were brutally extinguished. David Miller was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his days within the confines of a prison, the walls meant to contain the darkness he had unleashed. Legally, the case was closed. David Miller, the double murderer from Maple Street, was brought to justice. But for the families of Jennifer and the Mistress, and for the shaken community, there was no true closure. The empty chairs at holiday dinners remained empty. The house on Maple Street, once a symbol of quiet stability, stood as a grim monument to the horrors hidden within its walls. The legal verdict couldn't erase the pain, couldn't bring back the laughter, the smiles, the futures stolen. It could only assign blame and consequence. And the consequence was devastating. 2 lives gone, 1 life confined, all because of secrets, lies, and a moment of explosive, unforgivable violence triggered by a tiny test kit found, under a pillow. The gavel falls. The sentence is delivered. David Miller, the quiet accountant from Maple Street, is now prisoner number XZY, confined to a concrete cell for the rest of his natural life. The legal chapter of this horrifying story is closed. But the questions, the echoes, they linger. They hang in the air like the phantom smell of disinfectant that once permeated the Miller house, a chilling reminder of what happened there. Remember that house? The tidy split level with blue shutters. The manicured lawn. The symbol of a perfectly normal, stable life. We began there, looking in from the outside, seeing the picture of suburban tranquility. David and Jennifer. The couple who seemed content, building a life brick by brick. The kind of people you trust, depend on. But the truth, clawed out from beneath layers of soil and denial, was a grotesque distortion of that picture. The quiet man was a man consumed by secrets. The stable life was built on a foundation of lies and hidden desires. The ordinary couple was entangled in a web of infidelity and a devastating health scare that they desperately tried to conceal. The distance between the David waving on his lawn and the David burying 2 women in the dead of night, it wasn't a gradual slide into madness. It felt, in the chilling reconstruction of the crime, like a sudden, explosive break. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of stories like David Miller's. It challenges our perception of normalcy. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the most profound darkness can reside not in the shadows, but in the seemingly ordinary, in the houses right next door, in the minds of people we think we know. How well do we truly know anyone? How deep do the secrets go? What are people capable of when their hidden world is threatened with exposure? The catalyst here was so specific, yet so universally terrifying. The affair was a betrayal, yes, a common enough human failing. But it was the discovery of that hidden HIV test kit, the fear it ignited, fear of illness, fear of exposure, fear of his carefully constructed life collapsing, that appears to have been the spark that lit the fuse of his rage. It wasn't just infidelity, it was infidelity intertwined with the potential for a life-altering, stigmatizing diagnosis. The panic, the shame, the fury must have been immense, an internal explosion that manifested in unimaginable external violence. He didn't just kill in a blind rage, the disposal of the bodies, the cleaning of the scene, the calculated late-night drives, these were the actions of someone desperately trying to control the narrative, to erase his actions, to return to that false state of normalcy. His mistakes weren't just sloppy, they were the cracks in the facade of a man pretending the horror hadn't happened. The cost of these secrets, this fear, this rage, was 2 lives. Jennifer, buried in her own backyard, her wedding ring still a silent, tragic witness. The mistress, her life also brutally extinguished, a victim caught in the same storm of David's making. Their futures, their hopes, their connections to the world, all reduced to evidence in a courtroom. And for what? To hide the truth about an affair and a medical test. The irony is as cold as the ground where the bodies were found. His desperate act to prevent his secrets from coming to light only served to expose them in the most public, devastating way imaginable. The house on Maple Street stands as a silent monument to this tragedy. The neighbors still walk their dogs, the kids still ride their bikes, the lawns are still trimmed. But the perfect surface has been broken. There's a lingering sense of unease, a silent question that hangs in the air whenever someone drives past. What else is hiding behind the blue shutters? What secrets are being kept? Perhaps the most chilling takeaway from the story of David Miller isn't the gruesome nature of his crime, but the unsettling proximity of it all. It happened in a quiet suburb, to people who seemed normal. It reminds us that the human heart can be a territory filled with unseen fault lines, and that sometimes, just sometimes, a hidden secret found under a pillow can trigger an earthquake that destroys everything. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? About the faces you see every day. About the quiet waves hello. About the lives unfolding behind closed doors. Do we ever truly know the people who live just down the street? Or even, perhaps, the person sleeping beside us every night?